Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 5 of Reservation Road. Um, this chapter is called When Souls Cry. I like to go back to May 27th of 2009. And I was working and I got a call that my dad was moved out of ICU. So I was at work, so didn't think I could get off till later in the afternoon. But the guys I work for were family men and great guys, so they let me leave early. So nobody really knew I was coming to the hospital early because I had mentioned that I was coming later. So I go there. I go park in there, up in the garage where I parked, and I walked up there. And when I got to the room where my dad was, the door to the room, the actual door was open, but there was a curtain that basically went around. And I happened to get there when the doctor was in there with my father, and my stepmother was in there as well. So I get there and I overhear a conversation, and I hear the doctor say to my dad about putting a tube down his throat to, I guess, keep him alive. So my father then asked the doctor, "Can you cure the cancer?" And she said, "Mr. O'Connell, I've already explained to you, there's nothing we could do." And my stomach dropped, my heart dropped. It was the first time I realized my father was going to die. And hearing those words were something I've never imagined I would ever hear. But unfortunately, it was my reality. So when the doctor asked about not being able to cure the cancer, and my father rejected having that tube put down his throat. And when he did that, I went from my stomach dropping to emotionally uplifted. The best way to describe it, because it was the bravest words I've ever heard. Because I know if it was me, I would have done anything I could to stay alive, fearing death. But not my father. He didn't. So I also heard the doctor mention that he had a blood clot in his lung and whatnot, and so I kind of assumed that that could be an issue. So the doctor comes out of the room, and again, my dad nor my stepmom knew I was there. And so the doctor walks out, and I decided to take a walk with the doctor. I go to the doctor. I said, "Doc, I overheard what you guys were talking about in there." And I said to her, "So you're going to try to tell me my dad's going to suffocate to death?" And she was like, "Yes, but don't worry." She said, "There's something that we can give him that would put him under so he wouldn't know that he was suffocating." I said, "Doc, do you have children?" And she replied, "Yes." I said, "Doc, how long before you wouldn't take your children to come see him?" And she said, "At least a week, maybe 2. All I could think about was my young son, and I knew how close they were. And my father had been a huge part of my son's life, and all I could think about was him. So all of a sudden, I started to panic. I started to freak out a little bit because, like I said, the realization was starting to hit me after, that conversation with the doctor. So I called my godmother, freaking out, and I said, "My dad's gonna die. He's gonna die." And she's like, we met up somewhere in the hospital, couldn't even tell you where. But she said, "Let's get a chaplain." I said, "All right, whatever, we'll get a chaplain." And by the time we got the chaplain there, it was, the chaplain came, and I hadn't seen my dad yet since hearing that news. So when I walked in with the chaplain, it was the first time he had seen me that night. I was standing in the front of my dad's bed. The chaplain was standing, if I'm looking at my father, to the left. And on the right-hand side, stood closest to his pillow, was my stepmother. Next to her was my godmother, Beth. And next to her was my brother, Bob. And again, I was at the foot of the bed. So the chaplain was talking, and to be honest, can't tell you a word he said, because all I could do was stare at my father. And I tried to come in that room with the idea that I wasn't going to cry. So I came in all tough, ready to go. And I stood and I watched him, and I saw him look at my stepmom, and I could tell he was thinking something. And then I saw him look over at my godmother, who was his cousin, and he kind of turned his head a little bit, and I could feel the love he had for her. And then he looks over to my brother and tilts his head even more. And I could see the love he has for my brother. So he finally gets to me, and I'm there with this tough look on my face, and tears were just coming down. I wasn't crying, wasn't weeping, just water, just coming down. That was the first time in my life where my soul cried. I couldn't help it. When my father got to me and looked at me and he saw that, I don't know what he thought. I believe maybe he thought that maybe he just realized that was the first time that I realized what was going on. Maybe he looked away from a different reason. But he looked away in a way almost like he was ashamed. Almost like, I don't even know, but it was, it's been tough trying to figure out what that look was. I got all emotional and I was upset with myself, so when the chaplain was done and whatever that was, the look, I left. And when I got out of the room, I was gonna go home and see my son and my wife, and wanted to get to the car so I could cry, right? And go home. So I get there, and there's a whole lobby full of people. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, who called all you guys? I shouldn't call anybody. So I see one of my dad's cousins, and I stop to talk to him, and I'm there, and my stepmother walks up, and she says, "Your father wants everybody to leave." I knew she wasn't talking to me because he would have never told me to leave. But I decided to leave because, like I said, I want to go home to my family. So I go home, I have dinner. Don't remember much of the night. Probably shell-shocked. So I go to sleep, and I get a call sometime in the middle of the night that my dad had taken a turn for the worse. Got a call from my stepmom. So I head back up to the hospital. I get there, and when I left the day before, he was able to talk. When I left the day before, I heard him talking to the doctors in a sound conscious mind. When I got there that morning, he wasn't conscious. So my stepmom talked about let's everybody get an hour in there with him, and so I took my hour, whatever, and just sat there and held his hand. And previous to that day, I saw 5 people die in my life. The first time was in 2006, and it was my Aunt Betty, my uncle, my dad's second mom. And I was in there, and I was the first person I ever see die. The other time was before this, and was I had a bad habit of smoking. So I went outside. I didn't smoke in the house with my son. So I was going to reach for the door, and I heard a car crash. And I ran down there. I was the first person on the scene. And I watched 4 kids take their last breath in a car. I saw them move, and I was all excited they moved, thinking they were all right. But it was their final breaths. Nothing can prepare me for what happened that day. So I'm getting closer. Like I could see from my aunt. I watched her vitals drop. So I start to see my dad's vitals drop. So I start to know what time it was. So I'm in there, and I'm holding his hand, and behind me is my godmother. It was me, her, and my stepmom in the room. And I'm forever grateful for Beth for being there. And it was a very weird time because I was here on his right hand, and he was in a different room from the night before. And my stepmom was on the other side of the bed. So I'm holding his hand, and I could see all of his vitals, and she's doing some kind of theatrical act over there that I don't know. One eye was recording her, like, what the fuck? And the other eye, I'm looking at my dad, and I'm just watching his vitals drop, and I'm like, wow, what's going on here? Watching him take his final breath was the second time my soul cried. sat there afterwards, and I was just numb. I couldn't move. So I finally got up and got the courage, the strength, the energy, whatever it is. And I made a slow walk to my car. I started driving to the place that I needed to go to, which was where this journey began, back at Holy Sepulchre. And at that time, in lot 23, why this is a 23-part video, is where my grandparents are also buried. So I went there, and so I'm driving and I'm thinking, what's the significance? I'm all about numbers and significance of numbers, and thinking 528, and those numbers really didn't mean anything to me. So I'm pulling up by the cemetery, and there's like a left turn lane to get in the front gate, and there's really no cars coming, but the arrow's red. So I pull up, and right as I'm pulling up and I'm braking, I just say 5 minus 28 is 23. And right when that hit, I felt an energy come within me, and it was like I was laughing in a weird way, and then it was like I just felt this energy all the way down to my toes, and I just slam on the gas, run the red light, and I'm like laughing and crying at the same time. It was an incredible feeling. And so I drove in there, and then I get there and I do a lap around 23, the section 23 at the cemetery, because that's also where my aunt and uncle, my Aunt Betty and Uncle Larry, my dad's second set of parents, they're also buried in lot 23. So 23 represents family to me. 23 is when I went there is where I realized that's where I wanted my dad to be buried, but I never thought about it. I never knew anything. So my stepmom tells me that she wants to bury him in some cemetery I never heard of, and I said, nah. I said, that ain't happening. We're gonna do that here and here at the cemetery. So she agreed, which I was surprised. I was like, man, I thought we was gonna have to fight about this, but little did I know that when you have when your parent dies, actually the spouse is in control of the remains. It's actually bloodline. I did not know that. So she gave in, and I didn't know that I really was in control of that the whole time. So she meets me there, and she agrees that that was a great idea, and my grandmother and grandfather are buried there. So I went to the cemetery, and I had my grandfather lowered and my dad put on top. And while I was also there, I never really got along with my stepmother. I'll explain later up another episode, another chapter, but I gave her a gift that day. 23 section going there for me was a place of peace, a place of love, a place where I got in touch with that when I was feeling lost. So I signed away rights for her to have my grandmother lowered and her put on top of my grandmother so she could be next to my father. That was that was a big gift for me. It really was. It was a token of peace, a token of change, a token of new beginnings. We had my dad died on the 28th. My son's birthday is the 31st. So I asked if we could move the funeral to the 1st and the 2nd, the wake and the funeral, and everybody obliged. So I was there. I went, and when my dad got to the funeral home, I was there. I got to see him. The guy there was a friend, let me back there and see him. And then I designed the route to the cemetery, and we went there, and there was a little chapel you go to, and they do a prayer or whatnot. So everybody left, dispersed, and went to the restaurant. I stayed behind, and I went and stood by my dad to the end, as I promised, as they put him in on top of my grandfather. And before they put him in, I got to see the top of my grandfather's box, the side of my grandmother's, and they put my father in, and then I said a prayer, and I threw some dirt, and as I stood over there and I was looking down that hole, I had a feeling come about me. You see, I felt emotionally uplifted through my father's death, the braveness that he showed. So I was feeling good. I was feeling on top of the world. But when I stood there at the end and looked down, I had a feeling that it wasn't over. I had a feeling that there was more to the story. And that story and that feeling is why I'm down Reservation Road.